I'm Ken Rockwell. Let's look at Canon's newest EOS R8, which is the world's lightest full-frame camera that actually has a viewfinder so you can use it for something useful. In a nutshell, this is a great camera. What people may not realize was, and you can see the full reviews and the original camera files and sample images at my website, kenrockwell.com. Use the search bar and you can find the review, or just use the links in the description of this video. You can get straight to all the precise details at my written review. It takes exactly the same quality pictures as the professional $6,000 EOS R3, the same resolution, and as my tests prove, it has exactly the same ultra-high ISO performance. There's no question to the technical image quality of this camera, and that's the awesome thing because it's ultralight, it's full frame. You can take this anywhere and take the same shots you would take with any other camera. Resolution doesn't matter. It's 24 megapixels, same as the EOS R3. Some of the consumer cameras like the R5 have a little more resolution, but honestly, it doesn't matter. What really matters is the convenience for you. It does have a flippy screen. It does have an automatic brightness control in the finder, but it's convenience things it might not have. This EOS R8 also shoots faster than even Canon's top EOS R3. This shoots at 40 frames per second with full tracking autofocus and tracking auto exposure. The R3 is limited to only 30 frames per second. The R3 has a trick mode that runs close to 200 frames per second, but it's with locked focus and exposure. So what good is that for shooting moving things? It's not. The gotcha is that this has a rolling electronic shutter, meaning if you're panning, from side to side while shooting sports shots, you will have some vertical tilting. That is not great. So again, if you shoot sports all day for a living, you're going to get the R3 or a camera with a different kind of sensor that does not have the rolling shutter effect. It also would let you use flash with the electronic shutter, and you'll get better results for full-time professional sports shooting. But this is no slouch of a camera. What we lose compared to the more expensive cameras is not picture quality, it's just convenience features, and I'll go through that. What's new compared to the EOS RP, which was Canon's first ultralight, ultra-inexpensive full-frame mirrorless camera, is it goes to 40 frames a second, not simply 5 frames per second, with full tracking autofocus and auto exposure. The maximum ISO is now 102/400, up from ISO 40,000 in the RP. Again, this is a significant improvement to the EOS RP. The top push speed is now ISO 204,800. The finder has automatic finder brightness control, which works great. It has a 1/16,000th of a second top shutter speed. The level finally works at the same time as face detect. It was a weirdness of some of the older cameras. You couldn't get the level control to work at the same time as face detect. Well, it works fine in the R8. It actually has focus stacking, but not only does it have focus stacking, which the RP had, it can process the images in camera, and it even works handheld. Canon says use a tripod. Well, guess what? I tried it, and the samples are up at the written review at kenrockwell.com. Even handheld with my 180 millimeter macro lens really close, I'm astounded because it'll composite all the images, it'll frame shake them so they all line up, then it'll do the focus compositing and create a final image right in the camera so I can use it. It's absolutely incredible. What's also new is it has the 21-pin multi-connect hot shoe. So it has a standard hot shoe, which I use on my old 20-year-old Canon flash. They work great. I use my 580EX2. Works fantastic on this little camera. It's also got the 21-pin connector for the newest flashes, like the EL5. It has a 1/200th flash sync speed. It only has C1 and C2 on the top dial. It's lost the C3 mode that was in the EOS RP because it's replaced with these 2 circle modes here. This has video lens breathing correction. It has electronic video stabilization. It also has the AI autofocus mode that automatically selects either continuous autofocus or locked autofocus. The menu system's greatly improved. Again, if you're a full-time pro shooter, you're probably not using this as your main camera, and the original RP had a fairly abbreviated menu system so that normal people could figure it out. But what's nice is this has a more complete menu system where things like the autofocus settings are put in an autofocus tab in the menu system and not simply as part of the camera tab. What's good? Full frame quality at an APS-C price. It is quality made in Japan. It's not offshore to some oddball foreign country just to save the manufacturer money like Sony and Nikon do. What's great too is when you're shooting, you can program this, and the instructions on how to do this are on my user guide, which are again up at kenrockwell.com. So when you're shooting through the viewfinder, you can use your finger here and select autofocus areas. Instead of having to click around like this, you can actually just use this like a tablet or a pad. It works great. It's got square 4x3 and 16x9 ad shot crops, something the Nikon Z8 can't do. It's missing some of those. It works flawlessly with every Canon lens made since 1987, as long as you use an EF to RF adapter with some of the older ones. It does not have a 30-minute limit to video take length. The only thing limiting your video take length is your storage and your power. And honestly, I don't shoot video with this. All these videos, like the one you're watching now, I shoot on my iPhone because I think it works better than any of these larger cameras. It claims to be dust and water resistant too. What's odd is in the FV mode, auto ISO seems to ignore any auto or manually set minimum shutter speeds below about a 60th. Again, if this is the worst thing about this camera, it's a pretty good camera. The bottom card door here, again, it's a little more difficult to get the card out than if the card door was on the side. The fact that these are the worst things I can say is a great thing to say. The battery is small. It's only going to give a limited number of shots. If you're a serious shooter, you probably want to get a second battery and keep it along with you. It will charge via USB in the camera. The finder is only so bright, which means it's great indoors. It does have automatic brightness control, but outdoors it doesn't have quite the oomph that some of the higher-end cameras have, meaning that in full daylight, the finder can be a little dim, which means you're never quite sure if your exposure is right on or if it's maybe a little underexposed, and that's just because the maximum output of the OLED for the finder is limited. Also, at 40 frames per second, the buffer is only 120 frames long, which means you can only shoot for 3 continuous seconds before it fills, which isn't that bad, but if you're a really sloppy shooter and you're trying to catch the peak of the action, and believe me, 3 seconds is a long time when you're trying to catch your son or daughter, just at the basketball hoop up in the air or something like that. But it is limited by that. Some of the other cameras have nearly unlimited buffers. What's missing? Well, there's no second card slot. It's only got one slot. There's no FN buttons under your fingers here, which again, it's really only for the larger cameras. While you can get to 1/16,000th of a second in the TV and M modes, it's missing the intermediate 10,000th and 12,500th speeds. It jumps directly from an 8,000th to a 16,000th. You need a fancier camera if you need to hit those. It doesn't have a big rear dial. It has this little dial instead, which, so what? It doesn't have built-in stabilization, which I don't care about because my lenses all have built-in stabilization optically in the lens. You can't save your settings to a card, probably minor. There's no built-in flash. You probably didn't even care. The flash doesn't work with the electronic shutter. You use the first curtain electronic shutter, which is limited to 6 frames per second. Because of the small, simple battery, it doesn't have the technology inside of it to give a percentage reading, so it's only a 3-segment icon, which I don't really trust, so I would keep a spare battery with me. File name prefaces are limited to IMG_. You can't set something custom like DOE or KEN or XYZ1234. They stay as IMG. And honestly, I would code this as KR8 for the prefix, but I can't. Also, a little annoying to me is it doesn't have the same intelligent rotation for playback as an iPhone does. In other words, if you're playing back an image and rotate the camera like this, the image is not going to rotate on your screen to stay vertical. It's going to stay however you programmed. If you did rotate tall, it'll fill up a little bit. It's just missing that smarts, and I don't know why. And those are the basics. It's really just a question of user convenience. Things like the limited brightness on the finder, limited number of controls. The image quality is absolutely the same as my high-end Canon cameras. And again, I have the proof at my website. Go look at them there. That's not the question. The question is, if you use this every day, I have a whole article called, Is It Worth It? And what that covers is, if you shoot every single day, then you shouldn't try to bemoan yourself $50 or $300 or whatever from one camera to the next. Because if you're going to use it every single day, and if you appreciate the features, by all means, get what you want. On the other hand, if money is really tight, and if you don't use this every single day, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense to buy a fancier camera that might have a lot of features that you're never going to use, or just gives more. And actually, this has all the features for the most part as the fancy cameras. They're just harder to get to. And it's a question of how often are you going to get to enjoy those features for the extra money you spent. So if you're loaded, by all means, get a fancier camera if you want. And even the R5, R6, those are not significantly heavier than this when it actually comes to carrying around your neck all day long. The biggest thing is, what lenses do you want? By all means, treat yourself to one of those. On the other hand, if you want to be a trekker, if you're the kind of guy who cuts the handles off of his toothbrushes when he's out backpacking, this is a great camera, as well as the APS-C cameras are great cameras, or even a little less. So that's it for the basics. Again, all the explicit details are at my full review at kenrockwell.com. Thanks again for watching this here at kenrockwell.tv, and I'll see you at kenrockwell.com.